Hello everybody, how we doing? Today's chapter 13 is going to be looking at forests. We're going to look at how we're going to return forests and trees to Haiti, and this is what our case study will kind of look at today. We're going to look at how to repair a forest ecosystem, and we can do it literally by one tree at a time. So tonight, as we look through this chapter, you will hopefully understand that there are characteristics of certain structures of a forest biome. There's also different types of forest biomes, which we'll take a look at. We're also going to look at how species are adapted to survive at each level of the biome, at each particular biome, and level meaning specific kind of vertical type levels, within structures found in forest biomes, and you will see a little bit of that in a little while. And also, we're going to look at the current state and the potential action to improve our forests, both here and abroad. So this is what we're going to spend some time on today, and hopefully you can, at the end of this brief presentation, hopefully just won't be about a half hour, we can understand that there is a high economic value of forests and that there is a balance that needs to be strike or needs to be in place that balances management practices which allow us to both harvest the resources of our forests and without destroying the ecosystem as its potential for sustainable resources, so we can continue to use that forest as a productive member of what we need for our economies, but also to ensure that biodiversity and the forest's health are viable given throughout the future. So while this is an introduction to looking at this case study of the forest ecosystems in Haiti, there are certainly way more implications and things that can be learned through studying forestry and forest management. If you wish to do so, definitely look up future courses in the department or wherever you may be that have to pertain to this. This is going to be a very kind of introductory overview of this idea about sustainable forests and what forests look like. So, in order to look at the forests, we're going to think about the country of Haiti. If you all know that Haiti was this small island nation that was struck by an earthquake a couple of years ago, and it was hit real hard by that earthquake. It shook the land, unfortunately caused millions and millions of damage, and a lot of people lost their lives and homes and livelihood. But looking at the case study of this island nation, we can see that in less than a lifetime, parts of Haiti have gone from a productive agriculture to barely subsistence farming. Without the protective qualities of forests, tropical storms hit harder, and mudslides have become dangerously destructive. To counter the effects of lost forests, communities are coming together to plant trees so ecosystem services can be restored. So it's important to understand what these ecosystem services are. Think about the Everglades work we did the other day, and also think about the impact that communities and species have on biodiversity and how that promotes a healthy ecosystem in particular areas, referencing previous assignments, chapters in the texts, and in class information. So efforts at solutions. With assistance from American ecologists, communities in Haiti are planting trees, mixing fruit species with timber-producing species. And as you may or may not know, fruit species of trees are huge money. They're the ones that grow many of the fruit products that we consume as a human species. And the timber trees are those trees that are used in basically housing and resources, timber, framing, building construction, all those kind of things. So each member of the community has responsibility for their own saplings in anticipation of the day when sustainable forestry becomes the bridge between the needs of the people and nature. So that's really what these American ecologists are trying to do. Strike the balance, teach the people of Haiti how to produce productive forestry methods and how to balance those forestry production methods with harvesting and sustainability within those forest ecosystems. Okay, so that's what we're going to kind of look at. A little bit of the history of Haiti. And by the way, if you haven't been to Haiti, it's a place that you could go and visit and check out, or ask any of your locals around who may be from the area. Interview them, ask them, and say, hey, what's it like there? Do you have any friends and family? How long you been here? You'd like to get there? How do you get down there? Strike a conversation. It's not too far from South Florida, believe it or not. So check it out. But before maybe your local neighbor or someone that you may know in South Florida was his European settlers arrived there about 500 years ago. Each century, the lush forestry were cleared basically down there because they needed to produce coffee and sugar plantations. Oh, there's our coffee again, everybody, and the sugar plantations to sell at overseas markets and provide fuel and heating for cooking in Haiti. So European settlers come into this island nation. They see that the forests and the soils and the climate are sustainable. Well, they're particularly good at producing coffee and sugar plantations. And so they'll use the island as a forest grounds. They'll grow these plants and harvest the crops and then ship them back out overseas to the European markets and beyond. Now, we do have some people that have to work on these particular institutions, these farms and nurseries back then, and so they were then used to provide heating and cooking fuel for the people that lived on the island because they need to eat in order to harvest those crops. So some of the fuel was going back into the stoves of the Haitian workers so they could grow the crops, keep warm, also cook their food and everything else so they can grow the crops for the exports. Well, the impact over the years has been a 98% loss of original forests, loss of topsoil, undrinkable water, and the creation through resource loss of one of the poorest countries in the world. So 98% loss of original forests. Now that sounds huge, and it is huge. But just be sure you understand what does it mean when we have loss of original forests. Remember, 500 years is a long time, and not all trees are going to live for 500 years, so there's going to be some natural loss of forests in a naturally occurring ecosystem or biome of this particular tropical forest that you'll see. Okay, so it's important to understand that the humans didn't just come in and decimate everything, although they did. There's also natural things occurring in the surrounding forests and ecosystems that are impacting how those forests are sustaining themselves. Okay, so what are some of the forests that we're talking about? What exactly is a forest, and how are they classified here? Well, there's a few different styles we're going to look at, and you can check the text for a little bit more information about particular biomes and other biomes around the planet and around what they look like. But here we want to look at this idea of forest, because if we want to understand what happens when we're deforesting or cutting the trees down and reducing these forests by our activity, then we should probably know what we're talking about in terms of what is a forest. Well, forests typically cover about 30% of the Earth's landmass and support more than 50% of terrestrial life on the planet. And there's more than 60% of our photosynthetic leaves found within these particular types of biomes, which means there's a whole lot of oxygen production going on and a whole lot of CO2 sequestration going on. Remember, in photosynthesis, these leaves of these trees are using light energy to make a reaction within those plant cells called photosynthesis, which is basically turning carbon dioxide into oxygen and sugars. And it's using those sugars to grow, and it's producing the oxygen, which ironically humans and many, many, many other animals breathe in to live. Okay, so from this map you can see that this area here are the higher forests, higher latitude forests. Here's the United States. Here we are in Florida. Here is the area around the tropics that we're going to look at. And here's some examples of what they may look like. Okay, so the boreal forest, sometimes called the taiga, is basically dependent on its place on the planet. Okay, a slightly different temperature and slightly different levels of precipitation occurring. The largest terrestrial biome is the boreal forest. It's huge. It occurs at high elevations and low latitudes. No, not low latitudes, meaning low on the planet towards the equator, if you're thinking that way. Low as in low numbers in latitude degrees. All right, so remember, the closer you are to the equator, you're at 90. As you move towards the poles, you get lower and lower and lower. Boston's about 23 degrees north latitude. Miami's about 40 degrees north latitude. They have shorter growing seasons. Their soils are slightly acidic, and their major trees are evergreens. And so you can see here these evergreens and what those look like. They stay green all year round. Right? As you move down towards the equator a little bit, basically encompassing most of the United States, and I say most because not quite all, but most will basically have the temperate forests, and the temperate forests are those classic seasons, right? Those are where you go to see all the fall foliage and all the pretty colors of the leaves turning all over the different mountains and rolling hills and make it look like a Norman Rockwell painting. They'll have very fertile soils, a rich and diverse plant life. Their trees are predominantly evergreens and deciduous. So it's populated with trees that are going to be green all year round. And these deciduous trees, which are those special trees where you got it, the leaves fall off the branches in late fall, early winter, and you end up with those stickly trees all year round. And as soon as you get down a little bit below that, you are into your subtropical and tropical forests. These do definitely have distinct seasons, such as the wet and the dry season. They're very fertile soils. They are very rich and diverse plant life. Trees are predominantly evergreens and deciduous, and very much characterized by the amount of water that is present within these forest ecosystems. Tropical and subtropical ecosystems are super water abundant, lots and lots and lots of water. And if you see that line is basically intersecting the temperate and the tropical forests that goes through essentially about Florida. Okay. Now remember, look, there's no hard line painted on the earth where these things start and stop. Okay. They blend in at about these different regions that you're seeing these lines drawn on this map in blue and green and turquoise or so. Okay. So it's not like it's a line drawn on like a state line or anything like that. Okay. That in that case, then southern Florida is quite a mixture of tropical and subtropical and deciduous trees. From here into these different types of forest things, what happens if we're kind of cutting them down? Okay, if these forest biomes are being affected by people, well, how are they affected by people? Well, first let's see what the structure looks like. All right. They have distinct structures in these particular forests. All right, there's a canopy. The canopy is the overlaying trees that make up the ceiling of the forest. Right, and as you can see here, here is your canopy up here. They're very, very tall, kind of wide open. They don't have very many branches coming off. They're high-reaching and high productivity on the tops of the trees. Sometimes animals live up there, and sometimes they never even come down. They live their whole lives up there. Below that, you then have an emergent layer of trees which kind of peek out from the canopy. All right, so they're just kind of popping up. They're not establishing the top of the canopy, but they're kind of peeking up there, getting up there sort of higher. And then you have the understory, and the understory is a shade-tolerant level, which forms sort of a second canopy. So you have kind of down here. Now, these species of trees don't need all the direct sunlight they get all day like the canopies do. Okay, and what happens is as the sun moves around through the sky during the day, the different angles of sun rays kind of come in and peek through the trees and leaves and hit the understory at different times of day, and that helps them grow how they need to grow. It produces enough photosynthetic energy to do what they need. And then, of course, you have the forest floor, which is often the nutrient-rich area where flowers and seedlings are aligned. Things like ferns and scrub bush and all those things that live down here thrive, and anything living down there will thrive in it. And what's interesting is to think about anytime a leaf is blown off of this, or a tree breaks, or a windstorm blows off a branch, where does it go? Boom, falls down into the forest floor and ultimately gets covered over and consumed by the decomposing detrivores that are down there decomposing the stuff on the forest floor, and that organic material then gets passed back into the soils to make the soils richer and allow for more nutrients to be passed into the canopy and the emergent layers and the understory type of stuff that's growing. And that makes it more rich and lovely for all of the animals that need to eat that stuff, because the quality of the trophic energy has improved. So remember that when these things are pulling up the energy and nutrients in the soil, it's often thought that some of these roots kind of, quote, suck up the things that they need to grow. Whereas, in fact, that's not necessarily the case. The things that they kind of, quote, suck up that need to grow through their roots are mainly waters. And some of the things that they pull in, sodium ions and phosphate ions and things like that, those act as like as we know, as like vitamins and minerals. They facilitate the process of plant generation. The leaves are not then made of this stuff. It's just a way of, in nature, it helps the process happen. It helps water. For example, potassium facilitates water to move in and out of cells, for example. So while there are potassium ions that move into the roots of plants, they don't produce the leaf. They produce the mechanisms that allows water to go in and out more easily, which then helps water transfer into those trees and leaves and things that use the water to grow. So that's kind of what's happening there. And these different variations of the canopies and forests cause a vertical structure within this forest. Now, what happens when we come in and start to disrupt the forests? Well, why do we disrupt the forest? If we pull down those canopies, next thing you know is we've just totally exposed the understory and made those kind of the new canopies. And the species that live in the canopy trees now must compete and live on the understory trees, which have lowered their elevations and made them more susceptible for predation. And those trees in the lower levels may or may not be quite as strong as the higher ones, and so therefore they may be more susceptible to be blown down through storms. And so the actual trees themselves become more susceptible to damage because they're protecting trees. The canopy trees are now removed. Okay. The problem is those big, tall canopy trees provide excellent sources of natural timber. Remember that timber is the stuff that we need to make houses, boats, whatever else that we're using cut down. In fact, in this picture right here, behind the people, you can see structures, and I can clearly see a lot of it is made of wood. Okay, so one of the commercial uses of forestry in Haiti is the production of charcoal that is used by the villagers, and it's also sent to the city as a major fuel source. Now, how do we get charcoal? You got to cut down the trees. Trees is what create charcoal. Charcoal basically is carbon, and that then is used to ignite and is used as a fuel source. Okay, it ignites more easily. There's less water in it, so there's a lower flash point, and so they're more easily used as a burning fuel. And then the Haitians themselves will use the charcoal to cook with, right? It sounds so easy, Well, look, I mean, you go camping, right? Just go we got to cook something. Go grab some wood, some sticks in the forest, and then just grab them and burn them, and we'll cook our fish on it. I mean, what's the big deal, right? The big deal is scale, okay? Is scale and time. If you do this on a national level, like you might do in an island nation, or when settlers and Europeans came over 500 years ago, and they don't quite yet know how to sustainably harvest the forests, then they can start to degrade the ecosystem right out from under their own feet. Right? It's happened all over the place. It has happened. Okay? So what's happening is they're making this charcoal because it's so great to use as fuel, but they're destroying the habitat. Well, how long does it take to burn down a tree? I don't know. Let's call it a day if we're really even that slow. How long does it take to grow that tree? Hundreds of years, possibly. Could be 100 years old. Could be 200 years old, easily. Okay, so the idea is time again. Remember that first slide, time. It's not the fact that the forests won't regenerate themselves. It's the fact that we pull, or the Haitians were pulling down these forests, and I say we because we've done it all over the world, pull the forests down so quick, there's no way they can grow back in time. And so we fundamentally changed then the forest ecosystem, and in this case a tropical forest ecosystem, into an area of very poorly usable land. Okay? So, on top of the charcoal production, they're also increasing their incidence of respiratory disease and contributing to greenhouse gases through the processing of the use of wood for charcoal. So, once you're pulling all this stuff down and you got to and make the charcoal, everything goes into the air. Not only are you just replenishing the CO2 that was captured in all those plants and trees, now you're releasing it back in the air, and the carcinogens of the smoke is now bellowing into the place in which these folks are living. Okay? So along with the economic potential of the trees themselves, other organisms at each level of the forest also provide critical services through what's called chemical cycling. All right? Here's a picture of the Dominican Republic, another place I suggest you go visit and check out. An interesting land, beautiful for sure. So let's think about all those things at different levels and how they fall to the ground due to gravity. All right. Well, soil is formed by the forest as the leaves and branches decay. Yes, we get this. But the product of the decomposition is that nutrient-rich forests, and that's what supplies the nourishment that other plants plants need to support the consumer biodiversity. Okay. So when you think about the biodiversity of this thing, we're not just talking about the trees now. We're talking about everything else that lives in there. Because if we have a rich, healthy, diversely populated tropical, subtropical forest, now we have a lot of places and things where organisms can live. And even the feces of those organisms, yes, it sounds weird, but even when the droppings of of birds and animals are sharing seeds, are moving nutrients around the forests, and things like ants and little tiny bugs crawling around, decomposing stuff in the logs of fallen trees, are cycling those nutrients back in as they break them down and use them to create their own homes and create offspring and feed themselves and grow their bodies. And then they themselves die. And those decompositions go back into the soil and create very rich soils for these particular forests to blossom from. Okay? That then is creating these lush forests, which are locking up a lot of chemicals. Once we burn these things, the energy is released immediately. You and I will know them as energy being released as heat and light. I mean, you can feel the warmth of the fire and you can see the flame. Okay, very useful for folks up in New England or Canada where it gets very, very, very cold, and very useful for people at night to help us see. All right. So we can establish that there are good uses for humans to be involving themselves in these forests. Okay? But we need to recognize what the forests can do themselves and how we can use them as a benefit and economic value, and do it in a way that is sustainable for both the forests and the humans. Because if the humans go, the forests overcome. If the forests overcome, right, then there's going to be their own issues with forests, because the canopy is going to become too dense, right? It's going to become a naturally occurring thing where species will die off and other ones will come up based on the overgrowth. But if there is a function of an ecosystem, we can see that ecosystems contribute to daily functions of Earth's natural services and to the well-being of humans and other animals. Calculations of ecosystems worth place it higher than any other global economy. So this is what we mean by when we talk about how much are these ecosystems worth, how much are the forests worth to us, how much is that tree worth to you? Well, it's not just how much timber can we harvest from the tree. It's what types of benefits is that tree providing to the diversity and the health of that particular forest. So what are some ecosystem services? We have watershed services. They purify and provide for water. There's atmospheric and climate effects. They're a major sink for CO2. They increase rainfall in some areas, and they're the biggest contributor of oxygen to the atmosphere, which is extremely important for us. They maintain soils and protect the soils from washing away by locking soils and nutrients in through root systems. They look at they also play a role in disturbance regulation, where they protect areas from storms, especially in coastal areas like in South Florida, and provide shelters for animals and things to live within those storms, and also help to ensure biodiversity and genetic resources. Okay? There's also food and habitat for biodiversity. There's a storehouse of genes and provide useful crops and undiscovered medicines, as you saw in the last week's video. There's some economic value too going on here. Obviously, this is the whole problem, but the forests are great sources of food, of fuel, of building materials, and other materials such as rubber and cork. They provide raw materials for paper, industrial products, medicines, and you know what? All those people that go in and get all that stuff are workers. They're employed. They have jobs that are created to make a living in and on the forests. They also are wonderful places of recreation and ecotourism opportunities. And remember from last week, you saw the fan boat through the Everglades. There's hiking trails. There's groups committed to saving the forests and trails, and education and conservation efforts and photography efforts. People taking pictures and selling them on postcards. I mean, look, there's so much going on with the forest. How can you put a price tag on something like that? And then the socio-cultural benefits. They're basically beautiful places on the earth. They often are thought of as spiritual places, artistic inspirations. They could be thought of as stress reducers, going into the forest and smelling all the smells and everything. Well, I suppose it wouldn't be very stressless if you were being chased by a bear or something. But otherwise, there's connection to ancient peoples on the earth and the way they made their living, and ancient ecosystems and what it was like back then. And it's just a place for kind of ancestral knowledge, kind of this living off the land mentality, kind of how do we use the land as a resource, and respect nature as we move through all this kind of belief system that happens out there in some cultures. Okay, so they provide a good range of goods and services, but they face a number of threats, and this is why we're here, to see what are these threats. Well, just like all of those goods and services, we can overdo it. You know, it's like my grandmother used to tell me, anything in moderation is just fine. Well, when we're harvesting forests for wood and the wood products, or we're going to convert forested area into open lands for agriculture, or we need to just full on make it an urban center and use those resources to either feed the energy needs or make it into a city, all right, for humans to live, we can overdo it. We can kind of take these forests away and turn it into something else. And this is what deforestation refers to. You've probably heard the term deforestation before, but up to this point right now, I hope you're starting to realize that deforestation doesn't mean just pull down the tree and, oh my gosh, we're cutting down all the trees type thing. That's not what the whole that's what it seems to be what's happening. But there's more going on, which is what we were discussing. Okay, when you pull down these forests, all those other reasons we just talked about, and all those other things happening are directly associated with sustainable forests and what they can provide. And the reason, well, we're harvesting. We need to create places for our cattle to grow and ranch. We got to build roads for people to get from point A to point B. There are pest infestations that could occur as a result, and as a result of some of the things that we've done. So there are numbers of threats that happen to the forest based on activities that we're doing today. And if you look at kind of the graph off to the side here, this colored chart here, you can see that the net loss and HC is hectare per year, or sorry, I should probably call it hectare. All right, I always remember it as hectare per year, and this is kind of the loss. And you can see that there's a huge, more than 500,000 hectares per year in Brazil, places like Australia and Oceania over here. Some significant in Africa. United States is losing a bit, but we actually are in a net gain. We're actually, our efforts have brought our forest back a bit right now. That's not to say it's still not an issue, at least in the United States, because remember, it's one world. We're all connected, really, anyway. All right. So we're going to see that, and you can go into this much more detail if you'd like, if you're really interested in forest management. There is a history to it. There's a way to study the forests, looking at things like maximum sustainable yield, really harvest only as much that can be sustainably produced or replaced, multiple use sustained yield act, which was starting to create some legislation to help us understand how to keep the forests healthy. And then, of course, the forest ecosystem management looks at the ecosystem as a whole rather than focusing on the timber yields. And that's kind of where we got to. This idea of deforestation isn't just cutting down trees and seeing how many homes we made out of the fallen timbers, but it's more of a look at what is the entire tropical, subtropical, temperate, boreal forests as an ecosystem doing as a result of deforestation and human interaction. And this term kind of is deemed into this idea of forest ecosystem management, right? And if you're a forester or forest ecosystems scientist or policy analyst, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to do. And there's different ways in which now practices are thought. In the past, clear cutting was happening, especially up in New England, where they needed to build all of the they needed all the timber to basically grow the Industrial Revolution and all the mills that grew the automated clothing industry, so we can have clothes and everything else in like places like Lowell, Mass, and Haverhill, Massachusetts. But you clear cut them away. You fly over the country, you see an area of land that's clear cut, and this is what it looks like. It increases runoff into the waters around. Water is polluted because of heavily eroded slopes. You've cut down all the trees, you get a high profit, but now what? Now you got to wait for the land to grow back, and it's going to be at least 50 years or so for land to grow back into some sort of tree farm establishment that will produce some sort of timber or trees, but nothing like first generation forests. A classic example of something like this is a Christmas tree farm type thing, where you can see that they grow in sort of succession. There's different levels, and they might direct you and say, no, these ones aren't ready yet. You have to go to rows 1 through 4. And that's just what they're doing. Okay. There's strip harvesting, which is a little bit different. It's identifying tracts of land, TRACT, tracts of land that can be used to harvest, and leaving areas around it to keep some of the original stuff going on there. However, the profits are going to be lower because you're literally pulling out less product from the forest. But you're on a round robin cycle. Okay, you do this season, that next season, and you kind of systematically manage the forest and do this while you let other sections of the forest grow back. Okay, once you kind of let this grow after 50 years or so, you cut behind it and let the inside tracks grow, and now you have kind of a rotating crop area of these products that you can use. The biodiversity is lower than the original forest, but not as low as a clear-cut land, for example. And this is basically due because there are forests still standing around at all times, and they're still usable by some of the wildlife. So that is still going on. Okay. The select harvesting is looking at high-valued trees. Okay, this is one of the people, for example, if you ever watch the show Axemen, or American Loggers or something like that, one of those shows. These guys that go in there and pull out specialty wood, those kind of things, they look for specific trees to go in. And they're usually often big, and they'll take those big kind of chunks out of there, and they'll leave the other ones left to grow. And they call them the province or intermediate, and that just means because the volume isn't as high. However, each of those trees can be quite expensive when they cut them out. But still, it is a land management strategy that can be used to manage forests. 50 years after or so, you have those spots regrown. Remember, this is 50 years. It's basically about a generation you're talking, okay? So you have some stuff grown back. The biodiversity is higher, but it's lower than the original forest. However, there still is some use of the forest for its ecosystem management. However, the overall forest quality could be degraded. All right, and then of course there's shelterwood harvesting. This is where the best trees are left behind to reseed and prot. So you basically take down everything around. The only thing left to fall and reproduce are the seeds of the big trees that they want. Okay, so that's what will happen. Again, profits are similar to those of select harvest, but better than select harvest and subsequent cuts. So these are some of the strategies of and make money off selling those particular fruits on the open market. In case you're wondering, 1 hectare is about the size of the inside of an Olympic track. Okay, so that's what you're wondering about, how big that area is. About 2+ acres, if you were wondering. So that's kind of how big that size is. All right. So since we know this is happening, reforest efforts are underway, and only the part of the problem is addressed. Part of the issue is the reason they were pulling it down to begin with is because they needed the energy, okay, to cook, right, and provide light. Well, they still need to be able to cook and provide light. So what do? I mean, just because we've identified this issue doesn't mean that our need for those resources has gone anywhere. So we have to come up with a plan. One approach is to price the ecosystem service being lost as a component of the wood being harvested. Money from higher costs is returned to landowners, and which could then be used to have a cash pool, essentially, to help FEM, or forest ecosystems management, occur on a more sustainable scale. When you think about other fuels, of course, you can get into the whole renewable energy ideas coming into all this. That's reserved for a different chapter later at the end of the semester. All right, but this is what the idea is. The other thing is what can you do? Are there other ways we can work with the forests to help protect and ensure their sustainability? And ecotourism is one way that's being applied all over the place because it helps to educate and apply an intrinsic value of nature. And so therefore people have a higher regard. It's kind of like why people love polar bears so much kind of thing. Polar bears are ruthlessly, extremely deadly animals. Right? They'll kill you in a second with one swipe of their paw. But everyone loves the polar bears because they look so cute. All right? Maybe we can do the same thing with forests, and applying ecosystem initiatives could be a way, and is a way, that forest ecosystems managers are working to help raise awareness and raise this idea of conservation of forests in sustainable ways. Okay? So ecosystem management is another field that is interesting. If you would like to get into that, you can certainly do so. Feel free to email me or go into whatever websites or talks that you want and learn more about ecosystems management and ecotourism and what that might look like for a country's gross domestic product. For example, like the Bahamas, and see what they're doing down there, for example, just off the coast. Check it out. All right. But there are things that you can do beyond just getting interested. You can look at and buy products that are made of recycled material. That's a novel idea. Okay. When you purchase lumber for projects, look where the woods. Make sure the wood has been certified. There are councils that will certify the wood that it's been taken from sustainable places, and you can avoid buying non-certified furniture made from tropical wood, such as rosewood, teak, and ebony, which contributes to tropical deforestation. Okay, the jury's still out on bamboo. I suggest you go and take a look and do some research if you're interested in one of your projects about the use of bamboo as a building material. Very fast and renewable plant, but the process of turning that bamboo into usable timber, or not necessarily timber, but usable wood products is dicey. Check it out. If you're really into this stuff, you can do some group action, organize a work day, clear some invasive species, buckthorn or Japanese honeysuckle, take a walk through the forest, having a forest appreciation day, and if you're really loving this stuff, you can start to enact policy change. Support legislation that protects roadless areas and old-growth forests. Look to your grocery stores and restaurants, and check out their dining facilities on campus and at home, and see where are you doing and how are you getting here we go, the coffee and the shade-grown chocolate and all that stuff again, and see what's happening. The best way to get involved is by just starting out and seeing what the forests are all about. If you've never been to a forest or a hammock or the Everglades or anywhere, that's your first place to start. Take a trip, take your friend, take your husband, take your wife, take your boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever. Take yourself and your camera. Go out there and look at some stuff. Become a little bit in tune with the natural world around you. The more you know about the natural world, the more you might appreciate it. And then we can try to understand how can we best balance ourselves with the ecosystems. This was deforestation case study over in Haiti. Hope you enjoyed.